Hello, Klotz here, and you're watching Disney Channel. Da da da. Wow. I I don't know how to do the graphic design thing. This is my song Trials off the EP titled Trials, and I am going to walk you through how I made it and the decisions I made, as well as some of the sound design processes for creating it. So I will play you a bit of the song now, and then we will dive into how it was created. I'm broken, but I'm still alive. I'm fighting to reach the sky. I'm hurting now that you're not mine. I'm learning how to swim while I'm trying. Okay, now that the video is good and demonetized, we can go into how this was made. So, at the very beginning, we are just working with these saws that fade in. Well, in here, intro. So just some unison on a square wave, little bit of soft distortion, compression, and then super saw rack, which adds reverb, saturation, and just a dry signal in 3 separate layers. We compress it a bit so it doesn't get too loud, and then EQ it so it fits with the other layers. This saw, specifically, it'll be easier to tell here, is comprised of quite a few layers. So there's, I don't know if you can hear that, it's really quiet. Here's the main one that most people will be hearing. And these are all made much the same way with either square or saw waves. The top one, which I've just cut, you can see here, just to be the high end, and added a good amount of long reverb so that the high end will reverb out for longer than the mids and the lows. And then in the second half of the saws, we also have a lead. This is just a really wide saw. And here's another one. This one's a little more interesting. As you can see, it goes through the super saw rack, but no reverb. Gets some erosion that moves around on it. I wanted the grittiness to sort of change pitch. But if we unfreeze it, with no erosion, super clean. So this just adds that sort of warbliness in the high end, so that when you stack them all together, you get these lovely lush chords on top of a sub for the saws. It's just a sine wave, it's low pass, and then limited a bit because I wanted it to be a little more square. And then this lovely arpeggio, which is playing chords from here. It's playing these chords with a note taken out, and then set to an off cycle. So it doesn't necessarily cycle 4 times or 8 or 16 times. But this is just a really simple, just beeps, just little pretty beeps. Oh, I'm really falling into the Bob Ross thing, aren't I? Drums, just kicks at the beginning of this. But the interesting part of this is how the vocals are done. My process for recording vocals for songs like this and a few others is pretty interesting, I think. I kind of developed it myself through an amalgamation of other processes. So what I start doing is right here on this track, I record the vocals that I want to come through the track just straight into my mic with no processing. Then I put a sort of standard vocal chain on it just to clean up the vocals a little bit, saturate them, and then throw a vocoder on it and draw out the MIDI for the sound that I want. So I do the MIDI and then I just run it through. It's a saw wave in Serum. It's got 2 layers, and then sometimes I do reverb on it. So I take that, vocode it through there, and we end up with vocals that sound like this. I'll throw an OTT on there. Still pushing hard to see another day. Learning to breathe under waves. But personally, for me, it sounds a little bit too robotic and too static and not human enough. So once I've dehumanized the vocals with the vocoder, I run them through what's called a Talkbox. So this is mine. I have the MXR Talkbox. I'm not sponsored by MXR, but I wouldn't complain. And it's just got 3 basic settings: the volume, gain, and tone. And it's designed for guitars. So what happens is you run a signal into here, what's usually a guitar, but I do with this vocal, the vocoded vocal, and there's a little speaker in here that plays that sound. The sound travels through the tube and resonates through the entire thing, and I put the other end of the tube in my mouth. Then I use my mouth to sort of shape the sound. So the Talkbox replaces my vocal cords, but the sound still travels past my tongue, lips, and teeth. So just how you can make the same vowel sound with your throat, try it. You can make the same sound with your throat, but change what sound comes out with your mouth. You can do the same thing with this. So this Talkbox replaces my vocal cords in my throat. So I use that vocoded signal as the sound coming from my vocal cords, and I re-sing the vocals with the Talkbox. And so then recording that, we end up with a signal that sounds like this. So after a little bit of processing, I add some erosion to make it dirtier, especially later on in the song, and a little bit of compression in the highs because the S's can still be very sharp. We end up with these vocals. I'm broken, but I'm still alive. I'm fighting to reach the sky. I'm hurting now that you're not mine. I'll learn how to swim, or I'll die trying. And then right at the end, I add some painful sound system and some erosion just to gritty it up before the drop. That's literally it. This is a straight up must die loop, sue me. The drums build up. There's a frequency shifter on the snares. Bring them up. Got some hats as well. Just build a bit of tension and then straight into the drop. So the drop is pretty simple. It's really just 2 or 3 sounds, and one of them carries most of the body of the track. So here's the sub, standard sub, you know, kind of messy EQ following the MIDI. We'll go through the backgrounds, then we'll get to the main sound. This is a nice little, again, it's just like the ARP from earlier. It's just a little beep. Just to, you know, keep the pace going. Here's another one, similar idea. That's an easy one. A little bit of background pad to fill up the empty spaces between all the notes, because it's all quarter notes with gaps, so I don't want silence between them. Just a little bit of almost inaudible. It's basically wind. And then, yes, I did sneak Yasuo vocals into this song. You thought that it was a nice, sad, lovey, emotional vibe song. Joke's on you. It's about ninjas. It's not really. Here is the main sound. and you'll recognize a lot of tools. There's the bass clef easy washout. That's a classic. If you don't know it, then get to know it. Standard EQ, low cut so that the sub can come through, and then a little bit of boost in the highs and saturation. The sound is almost entirely in Serum. So with no processing, what we've got, let me pop Serum open, it's just 2 saw waves FM'd on each other, a bit of noise, and a phaser. This distortion hard clip really draws in the range of the sound, and so you see with this EQ, I have this peak is all that it's letting through, and then that peak is moving up and down along this curve. So that's what gives it the weird sound that it has. And then a band pass on top of it for more movement. I need more low end, less high end, because it's 2 saw waves FM'd against each other, so it'll be very screechy. Without this distortion, it's very scratchy, so just a lot of movement, but not too busy. Then we add quite a few things in here. So the first thing is just an absolutely disgusting, let me get these open. There we go. Just a real gross level of saturation. So I actually EQ first to, again, take a little more high out and a little more, add a little more low mid in. Just because the highs are super dirty in this sound. And then just an abominable level of saturation here. And that is what really gives it the scratch. So if we take the dry wet all the way up, it's not bad, but it was a little much for me. So half as much. OTT to bring the highs up a little bit now. What creates this sort of sound, and it's the same sound that I sort of did my Weed Haha Barely Alive remix based on, and some other stuff that I'm working on currently, is big peaks in this range here, about 100-ish, and then a lot of saturation after it. So you saturate those peaks and you get a ton of harmonics based on those peaks, and that's what gives it that sort of broken, pushing through a screen door sound. That's a weird analogy, but that's just what it makes me think of. Especially up in the higher notes here. Watch the peaks here, and then listen to the harmonics of those peaks descending. So that's honestly what the whole sound is based on, and then the rest of this is really just cleaning up that one sound. So we got a volume boost, we got the washout for later on, we've got an EQ here, and this is a mid-side EQ, so the side frequencies have nothing under about 300 hertz. That's in relation to everything that's different between the two speakers. If you want to know more about that, I did a whole 30-minute video on, I think it's 20 minutes. It's too long, about mid-side and what the difference is and what stereo image is, so you can go check that out. But a boost in the mids here, a smaller boost in the sides, but most importantly, cutting off the low end in the sides, because I want all that to be centered. Another EQ just to make sure there's no low end coming through on anything, and then that has a high pass for later on. Some more EQs to clean up. I find personally, yes, there's 3 EQs in a row, that instead of messing with an EQ that I already have stuff on and being worried about breaking it, I just slap another EQ on and make adjustments on that. So sometimes I'll have 5 EQs on one sound, each with 1 or 2 bells that I could have combined into 2 EQs themselves, but I don't know, I just get worried about breaking something, or I'll just throw a new EQ on and I'll play with that, and if I don't like it, I can just remove the whole instrument, and it's a lot easier. So a bit more saturation at the end, a bit of color in the low mids, and then soft clipping. That's the entire sound. The drums are super simple. It's just this. I really like this hi-hat being here. It just throws a little bit of swing into the song, so you can hear it sort of going back and forth. So I'm a big fan of that. This sound is that sound again, but just elongated. So I duplicated the sound, and instead of making it quarter notes, I made it longer and a pitch bend. So I can bring these all up. So you can see it start low and overlap as it fades up to the high note. And then this is the same thing, just with a sub. Except instead of going up an octave and 2 semitones, instead of going up 14 semitones, it just goes up 2, so that it stays in the sub range. This is much the same sound with a very tiny amount of variation from the first one. That's pretty much the whole drop. It's literally just those sounds. Same background elements for the whole thing. So then we go into the breakdown, and I wanted to bring the energy all the way down, keep it low, and then bring it all back in at once with the vocals. So we cut down to just some sweeps and the one saw layer. So everything comes back in. It's the same build essentially, except I think there's slightly more drums. Yeah, we take this layer out. We take the hi-hats out as well. And we make this come in later. So it's slightly different with the balance of the saws, and then we add this layer. It's just the sound from the drop, super washed out. The structure of the second drop is the same, but this is the big part. So what actually happened here was I was playing with the MIDI, reversed it, and the pattern sounded kind of cool, playing the melody backwards. So then I started playing around with reversing other stuff, and I ended up reversing the whole patch, but I couldn't figure out how to make it sweep backwards and still sound proper because some of the effects were time dependent, things like reverb, and I couldn't get them to sweep back. So what I did was write the MIDI for how I wanted the second drop to go, then reverse the MIDI, play it through the original patch, record that whole thing, and then reverse it again. So now the MIDI is how I want it to be, but the sound is backwards. So we end up with this sound here. So then after some creative EQing, differences in the mids and the side, and a little bit of high-end boost, that's the second drop. I wrapped all of the main patch up into one audio signal, and then we just have these beeps. No other yoinks, no Yasuo vocals. The second drop is pretty minimal. I didn't really need to do much processing on it because I'd done all the processing on the previous recording, and it's just reversed. So everything's still there. It gives it this nice sort of swing, this sort of backwards, because the note doesn't actually hit until halfway through the bar, really, but you get this sort of sweep up into it every time. And then just a long pull. I just stretched out the tail here. That's it, and then the drop is just the lead fading out. So that's how I made Trials. If you want to see how I made the other tracks on this EP, go ahead and follow the links either on the screen or in the description. I'm going to be doing one for each song on the EP. And if you want to learn more about the stuff that I do, feel free to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Thank you.